All right, welcome and let's dive into Gene Key 59. So the sun is in Virgo and it's hitting Gene Key 59 today. And the moon, let's presence that we're getting ready for a full moon in a couple days. And it is in the programming partner of 59, which is 55. So Gene Key 59 is going to reveal some secrets about intimacy. The gift is intimacy, and the city, the highest frequency is transparency, and the shadow is dishonesty. And that think about that flavor. And then as the sun is lighting up the moon, as we get ready for this full moon, it's lighting up the programming partner of Gene Key 59, and that is 55, and that's victimization. And 55 is part of our evolutionary sequence. So some of you who have 55, or if you've got 55 as your evolution, will want to go deeper into it. There's a lot, he put a lot in this Gene Key 55 that I won't be going over, but the gift is freedom and the city is freedom. So let's just say that our freedom is connected to our ability to be intimate. And so, like, what does that even mean? I think intimacy has a whole different meaning in the popular vernacular than it does in the spiritual, personal, maybe even more enlightened context. And this is its true meaning. So we're going to dive into this. I also want to presence that this is the final gene key in the series of the Ring of Union. And we're dealing with the family of humanity and what does it mean to be human? So if you remember, we started off with Gene Key 4 in early August or mid-August. And that Gene Key 4, the highest frequency was forgiveness. And the gift is understanding. And really what we had to tackle was our intolerance. So think about these concepts, these words kind of forming a whole in this ring of union and in the trajectory of humanity. Then we went into virtue, and virtue is the city is virtue, the gift is guidance, and the shadow is division. And last week we talked about one of my favorite gene keys in the transmission is 29, and the city, the ultimate gift of devotion. And the gift frequency is commitment. And the shadow is being half-hearted or half-assed or not really that committed. And so today we come into the ring of union with the ultimate, like, where are we going on this path? The path we're going to is intimacy, the gift of intimacy, and the city of transparency, to be fully known and to know others. And the shadow we presenced earlier is lying, dishonesty. And lying has several flavors. Lying has the flavor of an active lie, telling a falsehood. And it also has the flavor of omitting information. And so you can see that our intolerance, our division, when we don't really show up, our half-assedness, and also our lying to ourselves and therefore to others, really gets in the way of union, gets in the way of our birthright, the ability to really know others as ourselves. So I want to presence what Richard Rudd wrote about this whole ring of union. And I couldn't have said it better, so I'm just going to read it. He said that the sequence leading to transparency, so how we get here, begins with the process of forgiveness. triggered by the fourth gene key. And once you have forgiven yourself, I love that. Once you have forgiven yourself, using your relationships as your mirror. That's big. You will discover your true aura of virtue. So remember, in the virtue transmission, we were talking about finding that eternal essence, the eternal goodness, capital G, inside of you. And so once we have forgiven, once we have been mirrored back and seen our inner mess in other people and forgiven ourselves for that, then we begin to really expand our sense of goodness, godness. And once you have found your inner virtue, you begin to pour yourself out into others, recognizing the same divine source in every person you meet. And this is devotion. Devotion empties you, bringing you into a purified state of awareness where you no longer relate to people as objects or other. Now that's a high bar, but let's put that in our consciousness as our aim, like where we get to go as spiritual beings. I think this full moon in Pisces for me is really lighting up what's possible in our spiritual nature, in our mystical nature. So it's, let's use the Virgo mansion's admonition to, hey, get a spiritual practice, do it every day, get committed. And as you do that, I believe there's going to be some very mystical teachings coming through. It's that gnosis. It's when the heart space itself opens up, that doorway to God, and you see and experience something that is non-causal, that is from the imaginal world. And so I've been doing a lot of studying in the teachings, the actual non-dual teachings of Christ. Like, who knew that they actually existed? I mean, I was never raised like that. So I did not know that there were non-dual teachings of Christ. And there's a term in Aramaic, I think it's Ehidaya, that he was called the single one. And the single one, the church later interpreted to mean chaste or celibate, but actually what it meant was united. So he had reconciled duality within inside himself. And that was the transmission that Mary Magdalene received. And she got it. Like nobody else got it. She got it. She understood deeply the unification of spirit and form. And that is the Virgo Pisces axis that we're working with today. And that is intimacy. So let's create a story, a parable. And this parable goes like this: oneness. Remember, we talked about the worlds from Gurdjieff, like world 1, world 3, decided that it would break itself up into billions and trillions and gazillions of pieces in order to know itself. And that begins the world 6, where we start to have this idea of duality, that Eros, the energy, the Shakti of the universe coming through, breaking into form. For what purpose? Why? Well, we could create the story for intimacy. Because oneness can't know itself because there's no self to know. So oneness breaks itself up into parts to know itself. So that's the high spiritual context, the teaching in which we get to hold the transmission today of intimacy and of transparency. So Richard Rudd said, I'm going to pick up this theme and kind of riff on it for a minute. The shadow of lying, of dishonesty is really the way that we lie to ourselves. And yes, we do lie in relationship and all kinds of things like that. And let's start with the ultimate lie, the foundational lie, and that is the lie that we tell ourselves about ourselves. He said, this is the shadow, dishonesty, that makes the world a lonely place. Despite the fact that you have so many people all around you. And so, can you relate to a time when you have felt lonely? And isn't that interesting that we are bombarded with people? We're bombarded about knowing about people. We're bombarded with certain levels of connection. And yet, loneliness is one of the major epidemics of our world today. And so when I contemplate this loneliness, as I contemplate it inside of me, and I was a person who experienced loneliness quite a bit. And I began on my spiritual path to understand that it was actually a mechanism inside me. There was a mechanism inside of me around isolation. And when I look at the ring of union, for me, there felt like not enough forgiveness. I was trained, and many of us in this generation were trained to give away our power, to not really know who we are. And for me, I grew up Christian, so it was giving my power away to some external rules that I had to follow in order to be a good person. That is an inherent disenfranchisement from one's true self. And so the road back is the road back to the self. One of my teachers said, as I was entering into the work of non-duality, he just sort of cut it off at my knees. And he was like, Kenlyn, you have to be a person in order to be no person. So the road begins, like, and this is why I love this trajectory of beginning with Gene Key 4. We have to start here with ourselves. We start with knowing who we are. We start with remembering our essence. And that takes time. It's a messy process because in that growth process, you might have an aspiration, but end up acting less than your aspiration. You might get triggered, in other words. Your family might just send you off, and you might blame and shame other people, even though you're hearing these teachings. And it's a path, it's incremental, it's a trajectory. But the path of intimacy is first the path of getting real with ourselves. And that's what we get to do in our sisterhood activation. There's a process that's really beautiful that gives us the skill set, starts to give us the skill set to come home, starts to give us the skill set to become intimate with ourselves. And so intimacy for me means, are you aware of how you're feeling? Are you aware of the sensations that are happening in your body? Are you aware of the thoughts that are running in your head? Or are you merged with your autopilot? Are you merged with your conditioning? So as we peel that away, we start to distinguish between ourselves, our essence, and the things we were taught. And some of us have been taught so early that it's at the level of imprint, which is why we need teachers. Because when things are so deeply imprinted, we are under a lie that that's actually ourselves. And so freedom, this freedom of Gene Key 55, what the full moon is representing, is really coming out of victimization through owning our own experience, owning our truth. And we were just on this leadership call in the Rise Leadership Group, and Allison said it this way: if someone can argue with you, then it's not your experience. It's a projection, it's a thought. But no one can argue with your experience. And we're going to practice that in our sisterhood activation. So when we say things, when we name things as our experience, I feel, I imagine, I'm making up the story that it's not arguable. Like, no, you're not making up that story. No, you don't feel that way. Well, there's no other authority than you. And so that's a very good bright line rule, a helpful bright line rule to understand how we can become more intimate with ourselves. Because that is the springboard of being able to be intimate with others. And that's the trajectory that the ring of unity brings us. So can you imagine, can you feel that as you start to become more intimate with yourself, that is a kindness, that is a grace, that is self-love. And can you feel the space that begins to open up? Can you feel how you begin to see yourself as whole? The virtue of your aura, like your field begins to get stronger because you begin to own your essential goodness, your essential self. And then you can feel how now you've got space for others. And that space for others, there's a practice, and we won't get into this practice in the sisterhood activation, but I want to presence it because at some point I get to teach this. It's where we step into common neutral ground. So there's a way to be with others in that devotional field where wherever they're at, whatever they're saying, whatever their truth is, can be included in the common ground between you, but it doesn't have to get to you, shape you, like penetrate you. It's just there in the field, in the space in between. And in fact, in that field and space in between, you are actually offering them through your presence a chance to really show up in this common neutral ground. So there are really ninja practices that support our intimacy, allowing others to see me and allowing myself to see others as me, as we begin to unpack and, like in a Virgo way, really practice this ring of unity on the mat. There's something else I wanted to share, and I don't know if I remember it so much. So I'm going to see if it comes to me. Richard Rudd, well, actually, I'm going to, in the Gene Keys, and I don't know if he said this or if it was Neutrino Yogi, who does a lot of human design and gene key activation. He was talking about your authenticity is your new currency. So the new currency that we're moving into is your authenticity. I really love that as part of this matrix around intimacy, because it really starts with knowing ourselves. And because spirit is incarnating in matter, we're not here to be all things to all people. We are here to be a very unique expression of God through form. And that's becoming more and more obvious as humanity evolves. Even if people don't know that narrative, you can hear it in the collective space, where no longer do people want to be robots and slaves, just doing a job or doing a thing. People are waking up that there's something that they particularly are here to do. And that requires an intimacy with self. It requires experimentation. And so having the ability to forgive ourselves for the experiments that go wrong or are the not self or are the pattern, we're not going to know those things often until we experiment. So one of the things that I believe his name is Michael, who's Neutrino Yogi, was talking about is that the North Node moved into Gene Key 42. And that's heralding a new era of expansion and indeed evolutionary leadership. The shadow is to be in fantasy. So to have an idealized version of what your life is actually a shadow. And intimacy is the connection with what is. And that's what I was going to say. Presence. Intimacy is the connection with what is. And that's what we're going to get to practice in the sisterhood activation is our presence. Because we have so much that we're overlaying onto life. So many expectations we're overlaying. We just did the whole healing the mother wound this past week. It was a huge week. And so many things came out around our expectations of ourselves and our mothers and our mother line to provide nourishment in a way that oftentimes our mother was not capable of doing. And so part of our job, and this is why many mothers, the course is birthed, is to actually be open to receive what you need to receive in a million ways. In the way of the mother wound, in your many mothers. Allow your many mothers to heal and support you. So we're moving out of this idealized version of life, the Instagram version of life. We are moving out of it. And that opens us up to a profound level of leadership. And the pathway to that is going to be clearing out the ways that we have held our ideal without getting present to what's so. And for those of you who have Gene Key 11, like I do, that is your crucible. That is your yoga. Because in Gene Key 11, ideal is actually a gift. But the ultimate gift is to see how the ideal meets, like having ideal standards and then seeing how it plays out in real life and accepting real life, accepting reality on its terms. So we go back to 59. How willing are you to tell the truth? How willing are you to tell the truth? Now let's be really careful about that. Because oftentimes when, we're spiritual women and we are doing the work and we tell ourselves these truths, but we're just making an opposite projection. What if the truth is really very factual? And this is where the work of Byron Katie is so helpful because it clears a lot of distortions in making up stories. So we can make up stories in an idealized fashion. Oh, it's all going to be amazing. It's all good. It's all this. It's all that. or we can make up stories about ourselves. Yeah, I totally didn't get it. I'm this way, I'm that way. Maybe the truth, that walking that razor's edge of the truth is really sticking to the facts, giving yourself the discipline to actually just name what's so. And naming what's so is really sticking to what are the things you can observe? What are the truths, not the projections inside of it? That's a high game. And that's a skill set that has to be cultivated. No one pops out of the womb knowing how to do that. Well, maybe they do, but they don't have language. And then we like completely inculcate them in conditioning to believe what's true is what our family culture says is true. You know, it's like when you fall and you skin your knees. What happened is you just fell and you skinned your knees. You know, we can make a story about it like, I'm a bad person. See, I'm not supposed to be doing this thing. We can make up all kinds of things. And if you make them up, that is totally fine. It's nice to know I'm making up the story that, and fill in the blank. I fell on my knees and I'm making up the story that means I'm not supposed to go to the grocery store. Okay, great. Does that serve you or not serve you? Well, it serves me because I don't really want to go. Okay, great. Don't go. But do you see the level of honesty that gets to be told inside of that? And a lot of spiritual circles, we're just making shit up all the time and calling that our divine inspiration. And that lends to a level of idealism. And that's tricky when we're working with the imaginal world, because the imaginal world is non-causal, non-seen. And so I love the distinction of I'm making this up, I'm imagining this, because it holds it in a light of the mystery. And the truth is, I skin my knees. So I hope that lands. These are concepts that get to be played with on the mat. There's skill sets to work with, and practices like Byron Katie help us to train our mind. Is it true? Can I absolutely know that it's true? To see the level of stories we're making up, to get honest with ourselves, because when we're honest with ourselves, we actually become empty. There's a practice that the early Christians used, and it was an emptiness practice. And I love that. When I think about becoming empty, what I think about is becoming empty of all my ideas and thoughts, projections, lies, and letting them go, like just feeling them seep out of my body. And then being filled with the light of God. It's been a beautiful practice. And yes, I do go about my day and I have ideas and thoughts and I make things happen and I skin my knees and all the things of humanity happens. But this practice that continually empties me so that I don't believe so much of the stories that I'm making up in my head, or let's say that I get visible to them. I become even more intimate with the things that are running through my head so that I can begin to see clearer. You. If I'm projecting on you, I really can't see you. And yeah, we're probably always projecting. And I also believe there's like that sliver of light that can come through a crack through this practice. The practice of emptying yourself, the practice of noticing the stories that we're telling. And so as we end this ring of union and we bring together the forgiveness and the virtue and the devotion we come into a level of transparency. And in the Gene Keys, all these cities are really the ways that we become one again. The ways that we have seen through the illusion of separateness and become one again. So transparency, while it has a definition in this mundane world of being fully open to be seen, it also means that our separateness becomes so transparent that we begin to see the oneness. And that really we have never left the garden. So let's complete our call by rubbing our hands together, gathering all this energy that we have generated and dedicating it to the merits. Just beam it out to the sisters and brothers watching. May all beings benefit from the merits of our efforts. Namaste.